Welcome back to Archaeology After Dark, everyone. I am, of course, your host, Daniel Rhodes. My guest today is Kyla Hammond. Kyla, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Me too. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I have my bachelor's in anthropology from the University of Alaska, where I focused in bioarchaeology and forensic anthropology. I am currently doing my master's through the University of Winchester in their death, culture, and religion program.
So that brings us to what we're talking about today. I understand that this is going to be kind of a sensitive subject to people, but we are talking about death. It is part of our culture, and this is an episode I've wanted to do for a long time because given the field of archaeology, anthropology, everyone has their own opinion on death, whether it's something we should talk about, whether it's something it makes us uncomfortable. And honestly, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but it's still part of our culture. Would you agree with that, Kyla?
Yeah, so it's not just a part of our culture, but it's also one of the most natural things that we're going to experience. Everybody is going to die. It's inevitable. So it's not just part of our culture, but it's just part of like the human experience.
Yeah, except for, this digital video of this episode, which will hopefully live on forever and it will be enshrined at some sort of monument in the future.
Absolutely. I mean, immortality, that's a whole different thing.
It's internet fame. It's the only reason I do this show. It's not to actually educate anyone. So, what is it that draws people to be fascinated with death? What is it that attracts us to death as a concept, other than we know it's going to happen at some point?
Well, I think that's part of it. I think part of it is just knowing that it's there, but it makes people uncomfortable. You know, the idea of dying, somebody else dying, that makes people very uncomfortable. But humans are so weird and we are drawn to these things that make us uncomfortable. Not everybody is interested in death, but a lot of people are. And one thing that I've learned is that people who study things that are on the fringes, they like these things. They like to talk about what's kind of on the fringe of the society, even if the people on the inside don't want to.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is really great about anthropology and archaeology, that it's okay to be like on the fringe with your topics. Like, if no one talks about it or studies it, that gives more room to actually learn more about it.
Absolutely. I totally agree with it. I totally think that there is just so much room for discovery on a topic that not everybody is willing to talk about, and not everybody is willing to talk about it. And so you need certain people that are, because, I personally think that we should be more death positive and we should be more embracing of death because it is going to happen. It's going to happen to us. It's going to happen to our loved ones. It's going to happen to our pets. I mean, it's inevitable.
Yeah, and it doesn't make it any less meaningful that we want to talk about it more. In fact, I think it makes it more meaningful because we have a greater understanding of it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I do think that death should be discussed. It shouldn't be hidden.
Yeah, like, so, Nana died, everybody's sad. We don't have to talk about it anymore. Why though? I mean, she was a person, she had a name. It's important.
So, unfortunately, for most people, it's just hard. And I can share a bit of my experience with death. When I was little, I had an uncle who unexpectedly died, and it was very traumatic for our family. He died of a heart complication that nobody knew about. He was only 20. I was only 2 years old at the time, and so I wasn't aware of what was going on. But every summer, we would go to his grave with my grandparents and we would decorate it. And so I never had like the death talk. I just kind of always knew what it was. I just always had this understanding of what death is. And then when I was 16, I had a friend who was shot and killed on my birthday. And so when you're an adolescent and when your peers dies, it also changes your perspective of death. It changes your perspective of life because teenagers are immortal, they never are gonna, you know what I mean?
We are
Teenagers
going to
are
look
immortal.
good forever.
Right, exactly. And then so when you have a teenager who dies, it does change your perception of death. But I noticed that even as teenagers, we didn't want to talk about it. We knew it had happened, but it still wasn't something that you talked about. And so when I was 21, my mom passed away of cancer. And still, this was something my family didn't want to talk about. It's just not something that you talk about for some reason. Sorry, water.
Oh no, I totally get that.
And so, I actually started working at a mortuary. And so that was when I started experiencing other people's death of people that weren't close to me, and visually seeing death. And that also changes your perspective of death. And I noticed that my family didn't want to ask me about my job. I would have dates refuse me because my job was too weird. Thankfully, my husband was very cool with it. But I realized that people just really didn't want to talk about it. And I didn't understand why, because for me, it was just this known thing. And then in my undergrad, I learned about the American death taboo. And that was when it just all clicked that, like, yeah, Americans don't want to talk about death. And it's not just America, that's very ethnocentric. But there are many other cultures that also don't want to talk about death. But that's when it started for me clicking that we do have this kind of social taboo on talking about anything that relates to death or dying or being terminally ill or anything along those lines.
Yeah. And, at some point, it's kind of an inevitability in anthropology and archaeology is looking back at cultures and seeing that people have always celebrated death. But I came to the conclusion that at some point there had been at least like a single person who they probably lost somebody close to them. And they're like, oh, me sad, me do something make better. And then they dug a hole and put this person in it.
Right. Or just, even like how many things are not left in the archaeology, the archaeological record that maybe memorialize people and we just don't have a record of that. Or, maybe there was like a Neanderthal death culture and had their own mourning culture. Like we don't know because that not everything that pertains to death is left in the archaeological record. And so it's so hard to pinpoint the beginnings of some of these traditions.
Yeah. Like at some point, in the very distant past, like I said, somebody was important enough to another person who, was still alive, and they were like, oh, I should do something to celebrate this. I miss them. I'm sad.
Yeah, absolutely. And, mourning culture is just such a great way to memorialize other people.
And it goes like across the board now. Like every culture has their own way of memorializing somebody. Like you and I talked about this before we actually started the episode. Like the Vikings have the ship burial with the flaming arrow, and it's very dramatic and very sweet and all that. And then, we talked about like the sky burials in places like Mongolia, where you take the dead person up on top of the mountain and just leave them there, so they are part of the cycle. Circle? Cycle.
The circle of life,
Yes, the circle cycle of life.
circle of life and death.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's really amazing is there's no like one way to do it. There's no wrong way to do it. There's so many different customs to disposing of the dead and commemorate them, whether it's burial, cremation, green burial, sky burials, there's such a variety and just, cross-culturally, there's just so much death culture that we don't even perceive it, even though like it's there.
And then, every place has like their way of celebrating the dead, like especially in Mexico with Dias de los Muertos. It's very beautiful. It's fun and kind of kooky.
Right, yeah, like you totally have cultures that like are kind of on the opposite spectrum of death taboo, where they're like so open about it and they just embrace it and they make it like they don't make it scary, they take the fear out of it and they just make it such a beautiful celebration.
But either way, it's still part of who we are as a human society. Like we lose people, and you can either, be sad about it, which is one way, or you can celebrate it, which is the other way, or you can do both.
Right, and I think that I think that in recent years that's kind of how we're trending is like we're kind of moving away from this death taboo and we are trying to do more celebratory services. We're getting rid of that somber funeral and we're doing the celebrations of life.
Yeah, we talked about this. The ghost, the Anthropological Society is who it was, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that they're going to be doing a theme of ghosts for their conference, and I'm like, okay, that's so cool.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I grew up loving the supernatural and the weird. I mean, obviously, or else I wouldn't be doing this. And so for me to be going to an academic conference on ghosts is like fulfilling childhood dreams I didn't even know. This is going to be so cool.
And honestly, that's why we do what we do, so we can go to conferences and study the weirdness. It's pretty great.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Like, wait, somebody is paying me to study ghosts? Okay, that's fun.
right. Here for it, totally.
100% for it. Sign me up for this long term. I am here for it.
The perks of studying the unusual is you get to
Yeah.
study the unusual.
Yeah. And that's, again, one of the reasons why we do the things that we do because it still adds to the picture of the human existence because again death is at the end for some people, but it's more like a stopping point for others. Like if you look at reincarnation, death is just like an exit on the highway. Like it keeps going after that. Like you come back as a bird or a fish, or if you're bad, like a worm.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many different like perspectives on like the afterlife and not just the afterlife, but like how do we continue after death? Like, is there a way to basically like can we defeat death through our afterlife? I mean, reincarnation, that's a way of defeating death because you're coming back to life. Same with, resurrection, you're defeating that death because, okay, well, I didn't actually die, I'm being resurrected. So like, death's kind of not real. So I think that's one thing that's really interesting is we just mentally can't accept death. And so culturally, we take it out of like society. And then we're trying to take the death out of death by, doing reincarnation and resurrection.
Yeah, and it's still, is part of we can't get over the fact that it's something we have to live with. Like it's always going to be there whether we want to believe it or not. Like I can't just wish immortality on myself. That's not the way it works.
Right. Yeah. You have to like, there's so many steps that it takes to like get to that immortality and try and defeat death. It doesn't just like happen.
Mm. But at the same time, we've become very creative with how we choose to celebrate death, I guess. Again, with the face paint and the sugar skulls and all that, the Viking funeral, which big fan of that one, shooting our loved ones out of cannons. We do it all
Yeah.
on the spectrum.
Yeah, and I know that we already kind of previously talked about, but like the jazz funerals, like I think they're just so beautiful and there are just so many unique ways to like celebrate death and we can celebrate it like, each culture is unique. Each family has like their own way of celebrating it. And there are just like all these little microcosms of like how to celebrate death and it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, and you look at a more like traditional service, it's the visiting of the person, whether it's an open casket or not. And then there's like a tasteful slideshow in the background. Sometimes it's of the person who's actually being celebrated. Sometimes it's the incorrect person, and that's embarrassing for everybody. But it's still a weird, celebration of the person, even though they're still there in the room.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting. And I love that you describe that as being the traditional way because working in a mortuary, I cannot tell you how many funerals like were exactly like that. So that is definitely like a traditional way in America of how we do our services.
But then, you look at the traditional Greek way of doing things, it's two coins on the eyes and then light that bad boy up. Yeah, I've seen too many movies with the Greek funeral pyre, so I'm just like, okay, they're gonna put two coins on the eyes and light that bad boy up. That's how desensitized to this I am.
Oh, well, you should try working in the death industry. You become very desensitized to most things.
Yeah, so how do you keep connected to it if, desensitization, I may have just invented a word there, is like an occupational hazard?
So for me personally, I became really good at compartmentalizing. I worked at a mortuary. Part of my job was doing body removals, and I also was a crematory operator. And so when you're at work, you have to have this just almost excessive amount of compassion, and you can't let it get to you because you don't know when you're going to interact with the family. You don't know when you get a call, you're going to somebody's worst day.
Yeah.
It's just what it is. And so you have to keep that compassion and composure, and you can't let them know that it gets to you because they are putting their trust in you to take care of their family member that you have to keep it together. Now, when you go home, that's a totally different story. That's, you know, composure gone. Like, doesn't exist.
Like you don't want to be like examining or preparing somebody's loved one and being like, so yeah, that's what old people do. They die.
Yeah, no, you have to be very compassionate. You have to watch the way you speak, the things that you say, because again, that's somebody's loved one. You know, you're dealing with the family, so you do have to like really check yourself. I also had like an issue with like this might sound weird, but like when you drive away with that person's loved one, drive nicely. I've worked with people that didn't drive nicely, and it's like if this was my grandma back here, oh my God, like so, you have to keep this composure because you have to keep that consideration that that deceased individual was a person, they were alive, they have a family, and most of the time the family is watching you drive away. And so you just have to keep that professionalism when you're dealing with it. You can't let it get to you.
Yeah, and that's, something that we as archaeologists and anthropologists have to keep in mind that we do have to keep that respect, especially in a professional setting, is when we're talking about someone else's traditions or cultures, that we can't be so ethnocentric like people in the past have been, especially when they publish something like, we're better than you and we know it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that like that aspect is also very important when you talk about death because, like we talked about, there's kind of like the death taboo and then there's death acceptance. And for cultures that have that level of death acceptance, we have this very ethnocentric view of like, that's disgusting, that's wrong, that's crude, that's corpse abuse. We have these perceptions that because they're open about it, that it's wrong. But like you have to take in all of those cultural, as an anthropologist and archaeologist, you can't think about it like that.
Yeah, exactly. You have to keep in mind that, even though the person no longer resides in that body, it's still a person.
Right, yeah, and to that culture, they may perceive the corpse differently than we perceive it, and they may revere it. And so by you having that attitude towards it is actually incredibly disrespectful. We just don't perceive it that way because we perceive bodies should be burned or buried.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody wants to, cremate somebody, it's just the way it is. Like, we would prefer that you burn them after they're dead.
Yeah,
Yeah, I feel
definitely
like
the
that's
best practice.
yeah, I feel like that's a solid choice there to make sure the person is dead, or else you do the bell in the ground, and if you buried somebody who's just really sound asleep, they give that little thingy a jingle.
Right? Yep. Hey, ding ding, come get me out.
I
We have to
mean,
do a whole episode on safety coffins.
just the mistakes people have made while burying somebody could be a great episode.
Yeah, like in especially in Germany, there was 120 patents filed for safety coffins because it was such a fear that people would be buried alive. That they have just like one of the hugest amount of patents for like all these different crazy designs.
Oh my God, that's phenomenal. So I'm sure people will be intrigued by what we've talked about in this episode. What would you recommend for people who want to learn more about death or death practices and want to go down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, Yeah, so I think it definitely kind of depends on your perceptions of death and kind of what you want to kind of get out of it. If you want to do the archaeology, I recommend Archaeology of Death and Burial. This one's a really good one. Um, if you are interested in the philosophical side, we have the philosophy of death and dying. And then one that I think is really interesting, and if you want to learn more about the death taboo, this is Aries' Western attitudes towards death. This one's really interesting. He kind of goes through the Middle Ages to the present and kind of puts forth these ideas through history of why we've moved away from death. So it's absolutely fascinating. And then if you're interested in why Americans do death differently, this is Inventing the American Way of Death. So this one is really good if you want to know, like, how did American cemeteries become what they were compared to like European cemeteries, or like how did we start the, funeral director industry and stuff like that. That's a really good one. So yeah, those are probably my top recommendations.
And I feel like people are going to really get into that. Like, again, be careful where you go researching these things on the internet because the internet is a scary, scary place when you research obscure topics.
Yeah, I definitely recommend if you're gonna do it through like an academic um, web page. Don't just Google. One thing I've also noticed by looking on other people's blogs is a lot of people will just use the same information, but they won't cite it. And I've personally come across several blogs that are promoting false information, and so that's kind of an issue too. You think that there wouldn't be false information around death practices, but there are. So
And also, make sure you're not going on something like Reddit and just typing in death because then you may or may not start talking to people who want to maybe murder you or harvest some
yeah.
part of you.
Yeah. I also have a blog called The History of Death, and so I also write articles, and so people are more than welcome to come there. It's kind of in its early phases, but I supply all of my sources. I make sure that everybody has all the information so that they can go learn from these things too. They don't just have to listen to me.
Yeah, they don't have to listen to us, but we like it that they do.
Yeah, I mean, I would love it if you'd listen to me. That'd be great. Or else, degree why.
I mean, it gives me a reason to make sure my hair looks good every day that you listen to.
Yeah, right. Instagram's the only reason I do my makeup anymore. I don't even know.
Do I have raccoon eyes from not sleeping? Maybe. That's occupational hazard. Well, Kyla, it has been really great having you on the show. This has been a really fun episode.
Thank you. I had such a good time and just a great time talking to you. This is so fun for me.
Yeah, so stay tuned for more. And again, thank you guys for tuning in to Archaeology After Dark. We're gonna have some more great stuff because it's a great program, or at least I think it is.